The Genovese crime family, the largest mafia family in New York, was secretly mentored by Vincent Gigante. He was referred to as the Chin due to his large chin and odd behavior, which frequently gave the impression that he had a mental illness. But Gigante was a cunning and brutal mobster who took advantage of his uniqueness. From his modest beginnings in the Lower East Side of New York to his ascent to prominence in the Mafia, Vincent Gigante's story is remarkable. In 1928, Vincent Gigante was born in New York City's Lower East Side. His mother Yolanda Gigante and father Salvatore Gigante were also immigrants from Italy. His family was poor but close-knit, and he was the youngest of 5 kids. The family of Gigante's father resided in a tenement structure, and his occupation was a laborer. Gigante's father taught all of his boys, including Vincent, the value of hard labor and the value of education despite their poverty, much like your normal Italian father would have done all the time. Gigante went to a Catholic school and did well in class, but because of his rebellious nature, he frequently got into problems. Gigante eventually dropped out of high school when he was 16 to pursue a career as a boxer. Gigante competed as a professional light heavyweight boxer between 1944 and 1947 under the ring name The Chin. The way his mother pronounced his name, Cincenzo, in a heavy Italian accent earned him the nickname The Chin. He was able to establish himself despite having a brief career by winning 21 of 25 matches. But in the end, his struggles outside of the public eye became his legacy. Young Gigante became involved with respected mafia boss Vito Genovese and ultimately became his protege. Genovese gained the boy's affection by paying for his mother's medical procedure. Soon after, Gigante started to associate with street gangs and engage in criminal activity, such as robberies and break-ins. It was clear he was passionate about his mob training from the lengthy string of mental and brutal acts performed. By the age of 25, Gigante had accumulated no less than 7 arrests. He avoided facing significant charges during this time somehow. Gigante was no longer a foot soldier when he was in his late 20s. Instead, he had gained enough reputation to get a position as an enforcer within the family. His criminal career was on the up and up. In between, I would request you like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Now continuing. Despite bearing his surname, Vito Genovese did not start the Genovese crime family. Instead, Charles Luciano created the criminal organization. Luciano ran out of luck and was prosecuted with 62 counts of forced prostitution before he could completely enjoy the benefits of his labor. After being freed, he was sent back to Italy. Luciano had to name a new head of the family because he was unable to manage the situation effectively from Italy around the globe. Considering their past interactions, one would assume he would choose Genovese as his successor, naturally. Genovese and everyone else were shocked when Luciano chose Frank Costello to be the boss. Genovese may have been faithful, but an ambitious man can only go so far with loyalty, and as you can imagine, he was livid at Luciano's decision to pass over him. Genovese would not take this lying down. He decided to eliminate Costello. Even though it would take almost 10 years, he decided to eliminate Costello and commissioned Gigante for the hit. Frank Costello was a victim of a close-call shooting on April 7, 1957 in Manhattan. As Costello exited the apartment building's lobby, 2 males came running down a neighboring stairway and started shooting. 3 .32 caliber bullets were fired at Costello, one of which got stuck in his scalp. He miraculously lived, and a few days later, he was discharged from the hospital. When asked about his attackers by authorities, Costello said he'd never seen them and even denied hearing any gunfire. A doorman, however, proved to be more helpful with the investigation. He was able to provide a detailed description of one of the assailants. 66 investigators from the NYPD were assigned to the investigation. A few days later, the doorman picked out Gigante in a lineup, confirming the detective's initial suspicion. The charges were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence. However, the incident was enough to force Costello into retirement. He was never seen in public again and died of natural causes in 1973. Following his acquittal, Gigante thanked Costello for his loyalty. Costello got the message and retired shortly after, making Genovese the unquestioned head of the family. Gigante and his mentor, Genovese, were later found guilty in 1959, despite having escaped jail 2 years earlier in 1957. Both individuals were found guilty of selling heroin and given prison terms of 7 and 14 years. Gigante received his parole 5 years after being imprisoned. However, his mentor wasn't that fortunate because he would pass away in prison in 1969. Gigante's criminal career continued to advance in the interim. He was elevated from a foot soldier to a capo or captain in the years following his release. But for Gigante, the promotion wasn't all good news. His position as a capo now meant he had been bumped higher on law enforcement's priority list. He had now become a bigger fish in a smaller pond. Aware of all these, Gigante began to hatch an elaborate plan to get the cops off his back so he could perform his duties in the family without any hassle. It all started in 1969, the same year Genovese died in custody. The police were able to get an arrest warrant that named Gigante as a suspect in a bribery scheme that involved police from the old Tappan precinct tipping him off in exchange for customary bribes. With his scheme to pretend to have a mental disease and to be insane, Gigante went above and beyond to avoid being prosecuted. Overnight, Gigante changed from a healthy individual to someone who had paranoid schizophrenia. Gigante was exceedingly meticulous in his deception. He was declared ineligible for trial after his attorneys provided the judge with a formal diagnosis from attending psychiatrists. He was then exonerated of all charges. According to Mafia informants, Vincent had championed a peaceful transition into power after the early retirement of Philip Lombardo, the previous family head. As soon as Gigante gained control, internal security measures were strengthened. He was never to be mentioned by name, even if someone wanted to refer to him. They may either clench their chin or make a C with their hands. He suddenly disappeared from view in the Mafia world. Since the police never heard his name, they were unable to get any information on him. Gigante didn't end there. He also made a bigger show of his health problems in public. He talked one-sidedly to immovable objects while walking the streets of his neighborhood, Greenwich Village, partially naked, wearing just a bathrobe and nightgown. He even started peeing in public. His widespread pranks back then gave rise to his iconic moniker, the Oddfather. Gigante's family heavily underscored the hoax that would go on for decades to come, especially with Gigante's younger brother, Louis, who was also a Catholic priest, staunchly backing his story. Priest Louis swore that Gigante had used multiple medications to cure his crippling ailments since 1968. Gigante was genuinely committed to his act. Between 1969 and 1995, he was committed to different psychiatric hospitals on no less than 24 instances. He didn't even have to forego psychiatric reports. The many doctors and nurses that attended him through these years were more than enough alibi for him. While acting foolish around law police, Gigante was working behind the scenes to grow the Genovese crime family. The Genovese criminal family quickly expanded into one of the biggest mafia groups in the nation. Gigante expanded the family's business activities in New York City's infrastructure projects, including loan sharking, extortion, bookmaking, and bid rigging. Under Gigante's leadership, the Genovese criminal enterprise produced about $100 million every year at its height. Vincent Gigante's elaborate act of craziness was put to the ultimate test in 1990, when he and 14 other defendants were indicted on federal charges in Brooklyn for a bid rigging scam. 75% of the $191 million in window contracts that the New York City Housing Authority awarded between 1978 and 1990 were the result of manipulation of bids by 4 of the 5 New York crime families, including the Genovese family. Following these allegations, Gigante was charged in 1993 with 3 additional counts of murder conspiracy, as well as a suspicion of conspiring to kill many mob officials. One of them involved a mob hit on John Gotti, the head of the Gambino family. For several years during these cases, Gigante's counsel presented false evidence of his incompetence. Years of the charade were wasted as the trial was repeatedly delayed by insanity hearings. After a half-decade of back and forth, the presiding judge ultimately rejected Gigante's claim of insanity. After the jury convicted Vincent Gigante guilty of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder, the court sentenced him to 12 years in prison in July 1997. Up until 2003, Gigante is said to have overseen the Genovese family while he was a prisoner. In an exciting turn of events, Gigante eventually acknowledged inventing his mental condition after more than 40 years of deception. When he was offered a plea deal to lighten his sentence, this took place. It wasn't important in the end. Gigante passed away in 2005 while still imprisoned. At 77 years old, he went dead, leaving behind a significant legacy that will live on in the history of organized crime. Now this video comes to an end. Thank you for watching.